I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. And I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
What did we see last night? Did you guys watch that? Welcome back. During his first TV interview with ABC News in George Stephanopoulos, left-wing actor Alec Baldwin says he doesn't feel guilty for the death of cinematographer Halyana Hutchins. She was shot and killed by Baldwin on the film set of the movie Rust, but Baldwin, who is also an executive producer on this film, says it's not his fault.
I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. And I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun.
All right, so Baldwin again there describing his exact actions. And, you know, it was a softball interview. There was no real check on what Baldwin had to say here. And he continues to kind of personify what we think is a disturbing cultural trend here in America, being too big to fail. That is to say, too big to accept responsibility for your culpability here. It wasn't the guy behind the wheel, right? It was the car that killed those people. It's not the people pulling the trigger. It's the guns that are killing kids in Chicago. It's not the prosecutors refusing to lock violent people up in San Francisco and New York City. It's the police, right? They're too mean. They're the ones at fault here. It's not the people looting. It's the pandemic's fault, right? It's the virus that made us do it. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about the rise of crime across America, and here's what she said.
Does the president still think that crime is up because of the pandemic?
I think many people have conveyed that, and also one of the reasons that crime, one of the root causes of crime in communities is guns and gun violence, and we've seen that statistically around the country.
Right, to your point, so when a huge group of criminals organizes themselves and they want to go loot a store, a CVS, a Nordstrom, a Home Depot, until the shelves are clean, you think that's because of the pandemic?
I think a root cause in a lot of communities is the pandemic, yes.
It's actually the guns getting up and walking into the stores and taking things off the shelf, if you believe some of these people. Let's welcome in now criminal defense attorney Joe Tacopina. Also with us, Corey Stroll, an attorney at law, also a certified firearms instructor. Gentlemen, great to have you both with us. Corey, I want to start with you and get your response to Alec Baldwin's explanation about what happened there with the gun. I mean, anytime you take any firearms class, the first thing they teach you is treat every gun like it's a loaded weapon. It doesn't sound like he's willing to accept that responsibility.
Well, not does it seem like that. Those were his exact words. He said someone's at fault and someone's responsible, but it's clearly not him. But as the executive producer and the possessor of that revolver, he is the last person, the last man or person to be responsible. And the great thing about it, John, with the revolver, when he said in the interview it was an unloaded or supposed to be unloaded, all you have to do is look down. With the revolver, you'll see if there are bullets in that chamber, in that wheel. So when he cocked it, he would have seen a live round or a blank round go right into where he could have pulled the trigger, that hammer could have struck. So for him to say it was an unloaded gun and he wasn't responsible, it's beyond unfathomable. It's unconscionable.
It's also rare, Joe, that you hear from a guy who might be held responsible for this, either civilly or criminally still at this point, getting one of these interviews and, highly edited softball questions here. Do you think this was a wise move? Would you advise Alec Baldwin to do something like this if he were your client?
No, I mean, do they ever seem to work out? I mean, Prince Andrew's interview, how did that go? It's like, I don't know where these lawyers that are representing these people, and maybe this was just Alec Baldwin doing what Alec Baldwin does, maybe. which is what he wants to do. But obviously he didn't come across well there, right? I mean, look, do I think he's criminally responsible? Absolutely not. Do I agree that he would have known there was a bullet in the gun? No, he's not a firearms expert. He's not someone who knows guns. But, here's the bottom line. Somebody put a live round in that gun. And that is the individual who should be criminally held accountable, whoever that is and whoever knew about it. That being said, he came across horrific in that interview because to utter the words, do I feel guilt? No. I don't know if he even meant that, but I think he meant guilt for the legal guilt as opposed to moral guilt. But my God, it just doesn't come across well when you say you don't feel guilt for someone who your hand ended their life. So I again, that was not a wise move on his part, but once again, they'll do what they want to do.
But to Joe's point, Corey, I mean, if the burden of proof is so heavy here that that you don't think he's going to be found criminally negligent for anything here, why not just at least show some remorse? And maybe he's not capable of doing something. We've seen this with Alec Baldwin before. And the other thing that makes this, so I think hard to swallow for so many folks is Alec Baldwin was so sanctimonious about guns in the past, and here he is in this situation. I think it's just a good reminder for all of us to maybe dial it back on the rhetoric a little bit sometimes.
Well, karma is funny sometimes, and unfortunately, John, I disagree a little bit with Joe. It was very well said, Joe. I agree with 99%, but in New Mexico, they have negligent homicide or manslaughter. So there is some criminal liability that may come out against Mr. Baldwin. But Mr. Baldwin seems to take the stance of the typical Hollywood leftist liberal elitist that it's never our responsibility. We never did it. It's the firearm. It's somebody else that put the bullet in the firearm. That person should be held negligent as well. But Mr. Baldwin picked up a loaded firearm, looked at it, cocked it, and everybody knows if your finger's still on that trigger and you let go of the hammer, that hammer's coming down and it's going to fire that firearm. And that's basically firearms 101. I teach that to people who have never even handled a firearm in their life before. When I do these trainings and I qualify people for permits, it's the first thing you tell them. Never put your finger near that trigger unless you know what your target is and what lies beyond your target. And unfortunately for Alec, it was a very innocent young lady and a director behind her who was also injured.
Next thing I want to talk about too, Joe, is what Baldwin might face here as the executive producer, really kind of the one who is supposed to be terminally responsible, making sure that all the subcontractors, everyone there is doing what they are supposed to do. What do you think he faces on that front?
Oh, that's civil. That's a civil liability, sure. Which there's no question he and his corporation and the production company of that movie are going to be responsible for. There's no question. I mean, they are. Civilly responsible for the death. I mean, it obviously was an accident, but there was a great deal of negligence. Even if there was not a crime, and to me, I still think there's a criminal element here because I don't understand how a live round gets into a gun that's a movie set gun. Putting that aside for now, there is civil liability, which is a slam dunk. I mean, I think Baldwin said on the interview last night that he would be surprised if the lady's husband who was killed did not file a civil lawsuit. And obviously, he's going to file a civil lawsuit, as he should. So
there's also the insurance aspect here.
Civil liability is clear.
Yeah, normally the insurance companies like to get involved beforehand, before the suit actually gets filed. But Corey, give the last minute to you. I mean, ultimately, you mentioned the fact that New Mexico does have this criminal negligence statute here. What do you think happens to Baldwin ultimately?
I think, again, he may play that position that he's this Hollywood celebrity. He may call in some favors. Law, and Joe knows this well, being a defense attorney, law a lot of times happens behind closed doors. We've seen it in South Florida. We've seen it in New York. We've seen it across the country. Alec may play that Hollywood elitist card to get himself out to, like you said, I'm too big to fail. I'm too big to be charged. And this was a way to plant that seed that he has no criminal liability and responsibility. This was nothing but a PR interview for Alec Baldwin.
Maybe based on what we've seen so far with that weird interview he did on the side of the road on the cell phone camera and then kind of snapping at his girlfriend or whatever she is, and maybe he just should go away. Just stay out of sight for a while. Maybe the best advice. Great to see you, Joe. Corey, thank you guys so much. Have a great weekend, gentlemen.
Take care, John.